Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
Hey, this is Arlene and you're listening to Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing. Today we are going to talk on an issue about the human rights standard in Malaysia. Malaysia's human rights upgrade, is it a farce? So with me is none other than the representative from the Human Rights Watch, Phil Robertson. So he has some comments regarding on an upgraded Malaysia's human rights record from the US report, where Malaysia has been moved from tier 3 to tier 2. Somehow Washington thinks that Malaysia's human rights record has improved, but not everyone share the same kind of view with Washington. So hi, Phil Robertson, how are you there, all the way from the US?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, thank you for calling.
So first of all, as I mentioned earlier on my introduction, what were the justification given by the US government for the upgrade of human rights record from tier 3 to tier 2 to Malaysia?
Well, let's be clear that we're talking about trafficking in persons here. I think the larger issue of human rights in Malaysia, there's no way to upgrade it because the situation is in free fall. We've seen a whole bunch of students just arrested. We have a wide number of people being investigated and detained for sedition or now for actions detrimental to parliamentary democracy. So the trafficking in persons thing is what I'm going to talk about today. I think the larger issue of human rights, this is something that Secretary of State Kerry and other visiting dignitaries who are coming to us, the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting later this week, need to be talking to the Malaysian government about. But in the trafficking in persons realm, there were a number of reasons that Washington gave for the upgrade. But before I talk about those, it's important to also talk about why this was done. Everybody knows that Malaysia has been part of the discussions about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the trade arrangement or deal that is being worked on by the U.S. and others. And hopefully they want to conclude it sometime later this year. And in the process of allowing for the U.S. Congress to vote on this, it has to be what they call a fast-track authority. That means that U.S. Congress can't take apart a trade deal that's negotiated by President Obama. They have to vote it either up or down. They only get one vote. And as part of that process in Washington, a senator named Menendez from New Jersey essentially put in a provision that said no country can be part of a fast-track authority arrangement and be voted on in the Congress if they are in tier 3 of the trafficking in persons report. So that made it very, very important for Washington to try to justify upgrading Malaysia from tier 3 to what is called the tier 2 watch list. And the reasons they gave for this, if you read the report, it doesn't make any sense. They're trying to say that there was work on a passage of a new law, that there was more consultations with NGOs. But if you really dig into the report, you see that all their justifications contradict other facts that they later present in the report. So they say that there's more investigations that took place in 2014 compared to 2013. But then they say, but there were only 3 convictions for trafficking in persons related offenses. So that was a decrease compared to the previous year. On one hand, they say that, there's more victims who were identified in 2014 compared to 2013. But then later they say in the report that the investigations were typically not victim-centered, meaning the police are ordering around a bunch of migrant workers who have been brutally exploited and treating them poorly. They say, there was improvement in the area of law, but then they say by the time that the reporting period covered by this report closed, the law had not yet passed.
I see.
So it was all about the State Department trying to fudge this issue, trying to come up with a justification that looked good, but ultimately doesn't pass muster in our view.
But do you see this sort of justification only in the context of Malaysia, or in general, people have always been questioning whenever a country is being upgraded in this trafficking in person report. People are questioning whether the U.S. justification is based on facts or it's just perception.
Well, it's really a mixed bag. I mean, there's a certain format for writing the report, but then the political decision comes with how the country gets ranked, and that's, of course, what the various governments in the region care about. Right now, for instance, up in Bangkok, where Thailand got once again continued in Tier 3, they're all complaining there that they got treated unfairly and that Malaysia got a special favor from the United States.
And do you share that sense?
Well, I think that they do have an argument that Malaysia got a special deal. However, I do think that Thailand does deserve to be in Tier 3 because their record on trafficking persons is quite bad. But Malaysia also deserves to be in Tier 3. Mm-hmm. And our view is that this was more about U.S. trade politics than it was about any progress that was made about trafficking in persons in Malaysia. And that if you look at the record, Malaysia has not done enough. Mm-hmm. You know, the way they measure this is that they say that a country is making significant efforts to deal with human trafficking. I don't think we can argue that Malaysia is making significant efforts. They've made some efforts. It's been a beginning here and there. There may be some improvements that are coming, but it's certainly not now enough to justify the upgrade that they were given.
So what justifies any country, not necessarily Malaysia, to be in Tier 2?
Well, Tier 2 is, I would call Tier 2 the sort of safe zone of this report. There are three rankings. There's Tier 1, there's Tier 2, and there's Tier 3. Tier 3 is bad, you're doing a poor job. Tier 2 is you're not doing enough, but you're doing okay. Tier 1 is you're doing great. Mm-hmm. And then Tier 2 watch list was introduced by the U.S. Congress because the U.S. Congress was unhappy that the diplomats at the U.S. State Department were playing games. They were trying to put everybody in Tier 2 so as not to give offense. And this is, a diplomatic game. They don't want...
you want to make things easier, is it?
So they don't want to give offense, know. So Tier 2 is where all these countries want to get to. This is, I think Malaysia's long-term goal is that if we're in Tier 2, we're okay. Tier 2 is not okay in the realm of trafficking in persons. It frankly means that you're doing some but not enough. But on the political dimensions of this, connected to one government ranking other governments, Tier 2 is seen by many governments, and certainly I think would be seen by folks in Putrajaya as being okay.
So it's still very much quite vague, when you want to put like a country should belong in Tier 2 or Tier 3. I think Tier 1 is probably very clear. You have to be clean of any records, or at least majority of your human trafficking in person records have to be very clean in a way. But for Malaysia and Thailand, because they are in the same kind of situation, especially being neighbors to Myanmar, receiving massive refugees and some of them economic refugees as well. Do you think because Thailand's being very close to Myanmar, they should have greater responsibility to address the situation rather than Malaysia?
Well, I think that if we saw in the Rohingya boat people crisis, both Thailand and Malaysia are equally culpable. There's been a complete lack of transparency about what the police found up on the Malaysia border. The IGP said that they found 99 bodies, but originally he was saying that there were 139 graves and 29 trafficking camps. So where's the rest? And who actually has been investigated and found responsible? There's no way you could have these huge trafficking syndicates moving the number of people that they were moving through these camps and the officials not know. It's not feasible. It's not possible. So I think Malaysia and Thailand are interconnected in some way because you have some groups like the Rohingya that are coming through Thailand to get to Malaysia. But they also have the same issue, which is that they have a huge number of migrant workers from other countries. Mm-hmm. And, Malaysia has at least 4 million, Thailand has at least probably 3 or 4 million. And in both cases, those the governments, the employers, and the authorities are treating those migrants very badly and creating situations where they can be easily exploited, where they're vulnerable to human trafficking, where they're in debt bondage, where, for instance, in Malaysia, their passports are seized. The women and the girls ended up, they're being recruited, for instance, for the purpose of, they're told that they're going to be waitresses or, work in the service industry, and they end up being forced into prostitution. These are similar problems that exist both in Thailand and Malaysia. So therefore, the question is, why does Thailand get slapped down, whereas Malaysia gets brought up? And the only thing that's different between the two is that Malaysia is involved in a trade deal with the United States and Thailand is not.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, we'll take one short break. When we return, we'll discuss further on the TPP deal.
The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
Hey, this is Arlene, and we are back again at Durian ASEAN, as of course with Phil Robertson, discussing on the U.S. human trafficking in person report, where Malaysia has moved out from Tier 3 to Tier 2. And of course, one of the argument, I think the major argument here is political as well as economical. Regarding on the TPP negotiation, I think the last one was in Hawaii, where Malaysia didn't make any decision on it as whether to sign it or not. How desperate is the US to get Malaysia and other TPP negotiator members to sign the TPP?
Well, I think this is an important political priority for President Obama, and it's one of the few things that he and the Republican-controlled Congress agree on, that they want to get a trade deal through in this Congress. Obama would ultimately like to be able to sign this before he leaves office next year. So he's made this a priority. There's a lot of arguments being made in Washington about the economic benefits to the United States, the ability of the United States to export more, issues of, like, for instance, greater protections on patents for U.S. pharmaceuticals, and a lot of other sensitive issues. So this is an important trade treaty for President Obama, and I think, no one country is critical, but Malaysia, I think the worry is that if Malaysia falls out of the deal, it's entirely possible that there could be calls to throw other countries out of the deal, particularly like Vietnam. Mm-hmm. Vietnam, of course, has a very poor human rights record. It also has provisions in law that control trade union rights and freedom. You can't form an independent trade union in Vietnam at this time. And that's one of the things, for instance, that U.S. labor unions and others have cited in opposing this accord, is that they think that Vietnam is not prepared to actually live by provisions in the law that set out that, labor cannot be used as for a competitive advantage. It can't be used you can't repress trade union rights as a trade policy. Mm-hmm. So Malaysia is important because if it starts to unravel, then, it becomes quite difficult for the U.S. government to continue to be able to go to the U.S. Congress and say, well, this is a deal that encompasses all of Asia.
Furthermore, with China and India, as well as Russia, that is looking in Asia, especially Southeast Asia, as the emerging economic market for the world, do you foresee that the U.S. will try its best to get as much economic pie as possible in Southeast Asia? But also at the same time, why the U.S. see human rights as a vital bedrock to trade in any country? Because if you look at other countries, usually they won't have a clause that the country needs to have at least commendable human rights track record.
Well, this reflects the fact that trade bills are negotiated and have to pass through the U.S. Congress, and that significant parts of the U.S. Congress are supportive of issue of labor rights or trafficking in persons. So now, the specific parts of the TPP and larger set of trade deals that the U.S. is involved in, that the Human Rights Watch is interested in, is labor rights. That you shouldn't be able to smash a union, arrest union members, prevent workers from striking, all these things are set out in the ILO standards. Malaysia is a member of the ILO, so it should broadly follow these core principles and rights. And the U.S., because of pressure from U.S. organized labor, has a labor chapter in these agreements. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem is that many of these provisions in the labor chapter of the trade agreement are a lot less enforced than, for instance, things related to patents or services or dispute resolution on economic issues. Mm-hmm. But it's
these were the highlights of TPP.
The U.S. There's a lot of different voices on trade, and as a democracy, those voices get heard, and policy gets put into these trade agreements in terms of what is required, particularly on issues of labor rights.
Mm-hmm. But what if Malaysia, let's say next year, Malaysia couldn't prove that it belongs to Tier 2? Instead, it probably had, just the worst case scenario, it had even worse human rights track record in terms of human trafficking, as bad as its neighboring country. How would this affect the TPP negotiation and affect Malaysia's standing in TPP as well?
Well, if the TPP is still being negotiated at that time, mm-hmm. It hasn't gone before the Congress, and Malaysia is in Tier 3. According to the Menendez argument, the U.S. would have to either not send the TPP to the U.S. Congress with Malaysia in it. They'd have to probably make a decision to throw Malaysia out of the TPP.
Mm-hmm. Would that be likely?
But if it's well, we don't know. We don't know the whole timeline or when they're going to complete this negotiation. Even if they're going to complete this negotiation, who knows? I mean, this is all secret trade talks being done behind closed doors. It's actually a real failure of transparent governance that no one knows what's going on inside these trade negotiating sessions except the trade negotiators themselves. In Malaysia's cases, however, if the agreement is already done and it's already gone through the Congress, then, the trigger no longer works. They're part of the agreement, and then you could downgrade Malaysia to Tier 3 all you want. The key is that it's connected to the authority of the administration to put the TPP to a vote in the Congress and have that up-down vote, as opposed to having something where the Congress can pick apart the deal on things they don't like.
Mm-hmm. So currently, for the Human Rights Watch, what's your stance on the report? Have you been meeting with any of the members within the U.S. government to express your views?
Well, we've been very, very vocal about our concerns with this upgrade of Malaysia. We feel it was inappropriate. We feel it doesn't conform with the facts on the ground. We see that there has not been substantive action to protect migrant workers. There's not been substantive action to deal with these corrupt recruitment firms who are putting workers into debt bondage, deducting money from their salary, seizing their documents, restricting their movement. We haven't seen substantive action from Malaysia to deal with corrupt officials. There was a 10-year report by the Malaysia Special Branch Police that was released in June 25, where they estimated 80% of Malaysian border officials are corrupt. Where's the action to address that? There's been no significant improvements to better identify victims or protect victims. Most of the NGOs will not send trafficking and person victims to the government shelters because they lose control of these people. They're essentially held under a protected order in these shelters. They're restricted in their movements. They're forced to take part in the trafficking prosecution. So, if you talk to people like Tanaganita, will they send someone that they found through their networks who is a trafficking victim to the government shelters? And they'll say absolutely not, because the victims are not treated well, and the victims don't want to go. And the idea of trafficking in persons, when you deal with it from a rights perspective, it should be victim centric. It should be what is best for the victim. Mm-hmm. And quite clearly, the Malaysian government system as it currently exists is not the best for the victim.
Do you think it's getting worse under the Najib's administration?
I think it's been bad all along. I don't think it's necessarily been a priority for any government to deal with. Now they're saying that they're going to have this legislative change. There have been amendments made to the Trafficking in Persons Act, which will allow some trafficking victims to have freedom of movement from the shelters, and may allow them to work temporarily. We'll see how that pans out. It might be an improvement, but it's not the sort of sufficient change that we see is needed to upgrade Malaysia. Let's be clear about who these victims are. Many of these victims are migrant workers. They have left home because they went to Malaysia to try to make money and send money back home. When they're trafficked into exploitation, they're not making money. They're treated badly, and sometimes they're sexually abused or physically abused. They need support and assistance, but they also want to continue to earn money to be able to send it back home. Many of these people took big loans out to afford the trip to Malaysia. They may have mortgaged their house. They may have borrowed money from loan sharks or others. They have debts to pay back home. And so they have gambled on being able to come to Malaysia and earn enough money so that they improve their lives and the lives of their families. And trafficking in person takes that away from them. So, a victim-centric approach has to also deal with the issue of not only protecting these people, giving them services they need, but also allowing them the freedom of movement and allowing them to continue to work if they want to do so.
So currently the Malaysia's system is focusing on what? Are they merely just covering the situation to make it look good, not addressing the root cause at all?
It seems to me that they're not addressing the root cause. They're not dealing with the labor recruitment firms under the Ministry of Home Affairs, which are corrupt. They're not dealing with the corrupt police or law enforcement officials. They're not. But
why this inefficiency? Is it because of the nature of the institution that has?
I think it's because the Malaysian government hasn't prioritized this issue as something they care about, and that the overall approach to migrant workers in Malaysia is to exploit them. You exploit them, you take what you can from them, and then you arrest them and send them home.
Is this because, is it because of the legacy of since Tun Mahathir's time, where our institution has somehow become less effective?
I think that the exploitation of migrant workers as a matter of state policy to try to, create a low-wage competitive advantage for Malaysia has been a policy of the state all along. The problem is that no one has been willing to deal with the abuses that are created by this system. They have essentially allowed the employers and the labor recruiting firms and brokers to do what they will with these people. And when they get trafficked, the government officials have looked the other way, or they've taken a packet to not do anything about it. Now the government is being told that you have to do something to protect migrant workers. You have to do something to protect these trafficking victims. And just when they start to do something, all of a sudden you get the reward. Well, the response will probably be from the Malaysian government, like, okay, we're good enough. We don't have to do anything more. And our friend in Washington will take care of us if we don't do everything we need to do.
Anyway, we'll take one short break. When we return, we'll discuss more about human trafficking in the ASEAN context.
The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
Hey, this is Arlene, and we are back again with Phil Robertson from Human Rights Watch. As you all know, the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting is happening this week. And of course, a lot of issues will be in discussion, including issues regarding on human trafficking and refugees. What do you foresee on ASEAN? Would they be addressing the refugee crisis, or even on the case with human trafficking?
Well, unfortunately, ASEAN is not quite the sum of its parts. It's been disappointing all along on this issue of the Rohingya boat people crisis. I think that, if you spoke to government officials from Thailand or Malaysia or others, they would also privately say to you that ASEAN has been disappointing. The issue is that Burma objects to ASEAN being involved in the issues of the Rohingya or the boat people crisis or what is happening in Arakan state with the persecution of the Rohingya. And ASEAN has not figured out how to overcome that objection from the Burma government. Let's be clear. We have found crimes against humanity taking place against the Rohingya and ethnic cleansing. This is what happened in 2012. This is one of the reasons that has fueled this desperate move of people out of Arakan state onto these boats, trying to make their way to Malaysia. Malaysia does deserve some degree of credit in accepting so many Rohingya, although unofficially. There's a large Rohingya population that live in Malaysia, and by and large, they've been able to find their way and prosper and be able to, in some ways, remake their lives after fleeing state persecution in Burma. But ASEAN has not done anything. I mean, try to find a statement from ASEAN about the Rohingya crisis. You can't find one because
even
Burma
the word Rohingya itself is somehow censored.
Well, let's be clear. ASEAN continues to have this policy to allow one member state to veto discussions at the larger organization. Because everything has to be consensus-based, ASEAN can't do anything. My view is that ASEAN needs to change its rules. This is rules from a bygone era. It doesn't reflect the new reality facing ASEAN. And ASEAN needs to grow up. It needs to recognize that you cannot allow one member state to stop regional progress. Look at the EU. The EU doesn't allow one member state to stop its progress. I mean, obviously everybody gets a chance to discuss things. Everybody gets their say. But if it comes to a vote, it comes to a vote, and then the majority takes it forward. Why isn't ASEAN that way? Why isn't ASEAN democratic? If there is a key issue that needs to be discussed and, 7 or 6 or 8 of the members agree and 2 don't, well, I think ASEAN should be able to have a vote and move forward instead of once again being shown to be an ineffectual, toothless tiger.
Why do you see that there's a lack of political will among these leaders to move towards the 21st century? Because these are bygone eras, all the ASEAN charters and all that.
Well, I think that many of these leaders have skeletons in their closet. They're all concerned that if I raise an issue about Burma, like what they're doing to the Rohingya, then somebody will raise an issue about my country. So because all of these governments have been involved in significant human rights abuses against their citizens, no one wants to start the discussion. No one wants to be the one to point the finger at anyone else. So then they can just talk about economics instead and, travel to exotic places in different parts of ASEAN and, sound important, be very official. I mean, ASEAN is sort of straitjacketed into this formality that prevents any sort of significant innovation or creativity coming out of the ASEAN process. ASEAN right now is supposedly talking about a convention on trafficking in persons. I expect that if there is such a convention that comes out, it will be announced with great fanfare and then disappear without a trace because there's no enforcement. I remember very clearly the ASEAN Secretary General, Surin Pitsuwan, saying that, 75% of the things that are discussed in ASEAN don't get implemented. He's right. That's why ASEAN has become, for many people in the region, irrelevant to their lives. So, they see the foreign ministers flying off to KL for another meeting, and the only people that really know or care what's going on are the people who work in the foreign ministries and the governments.
One of the discussion that they will be having this week, which is within the ASEAN Intergovernmental Human Rights Commission, I think they say that they will be discussing about this issue seriously. Do you see ICHR is moving forward to be taken seriously in ASEAN?
ICHR has been a fundamental failure. ICHR, in my view, hardly deserves the name of a human rights commission. When you set up a situation where one government or any set of governments can veto forward progress, I don't know why anybody would actually even bother to talk about Aicher. It's a huge disappointment. It is a commission that can't even receive complaints on human rights from various people whose human rights are abused. Mm-hmm. When you talk to an ordinary person on the street and you say, oh, Human Rights Commission, what is the first thing that person thinks? It's like, if I have a problem with human rights, I can go talk to them and they'll receive my complaint and do something about it. Well, Aicher can't even do that. Aicher is a talk shop in the worst possible sense of the ASEAN word of talk shop. It is unfortunately not worth the time. And the only people that really care about what's happening in Aicher are the commissioners and the staff who work there and the governments who continue to say, well, we don't want to deal with this issue. Maybe Aicher can study it for a while.
So Aicher is just a way for the government to say to the world that they are taking human rights seriously, but nothing is actually being moved forward in terms of addressing the real issue on the ground.
It's like a Potemkin village, you know, people sail past it and they look up there and they think that it's a real commission. But if you stare behind it, there's nothing but the picture. There's no substance behind it. It's a waste of time, in my view. I mean, we see now Aicher as being something to try to prevent bad policy from coming out of more than something we want to engage or try to encourage.
During the meeting itself, besides Aicher and other important meetings that will be happening within ASEAN framework, also some international actors coming in, and one of it is John Kerry. If I'm not mistaken, Human Rights Watch will be releasing a statement to him regarding on the human trafficking issue in this region.
That's correct. John Kerry will be in Malaysia. We understand that he's going to be meeting with Prime Minister Najib and the Foreign Minister. And we joined with 4 other organizations to press for John Kerry to raise issues on human trafficking with the Malaysian government in a very strong way. We joined, the groups that joined this were, Human Rights First, Human Rights Watch, Humanity United, but also the Malaysian Trade Unions Congress, which is an important trade union congress there in Malaysia. There's a whole series of significant problems. I mean, we called on John Kerry to press him on ensuring Malaysia prosecutes traffickers, does a real investigation of the mass graves on the Thai-Malaysia border, revamps the migrant recruitment procedures to make them fair and prevent the abuse of migrants, including debt bondage, forced overtime, and other abuses, and also really effectively implements the new amendments to the anti-trafficking law, which the U.S. State Department mentioned in their analysis of the situation in Malaysia, but also said that those provisions had not yet been fully implemented.
So what is Human Rights Watch doing right now to get as many attention from either the U.S. government or some key decision maker within the U.S. political framework?
Well, I mean, we're talking to the U.S. Congress. I mean, when you have a problem with the White House and the White House doesn't want to listen to what you're saying, you go to the Congress, and that's what we've been doing. The U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I believe the House Foreign Affairs Committee will both be holding hearings to talk about the upgrade on trafficking persons for Malaysia, to raise some serious concerns about how that upgrade has damaged the credibility of the Global Trafficking Persons Report, and to demand that the U.S. State Department fully explain themselves on how they came to this decision. It will be, in my view, important to have a full airing of these issues. I mean,
have they given
ultimately the Congress is quite angry about this. So there will be a lot of fireworks, I think, probably at these hearings, where State Department people will really be pressured very strongly by the members of Congress to explain themselves. We'll see what comes out of there, but I mean, that's what we're doing now. That's how one of the accountability systems for the U.S. government is that we have a functioning elected parliament that takes its issues and seriously. And I mean, it's not like a sort of rubber stamp parliament you have with UMNO control in Malaysia.
About Malaysia, do you think they really care having an upgrade would affect Malaysia's stand?
Well, I think Malaysia cares about being in the TPP. And if Malaysia thought that they were going to be thrown out of the TPP because they were failing the grade on trafficking in persons, then they would do a lot on trafficking in persons.
But do you see them doing anything about it?
It's days after this upgrade took place. I think that there needs to be more time to assess what's going to happen. Our view would have been that Malaysia should have been kept in Tier 3, that Malaysia should have been told, look, you have to really shape up and improve your record on trafficking in persons, or, when we get to the final hours of the TPP negotiations, we'll throw you out. Mm-hmm. That would have actually really compelled the Malaysian government to make a huge amount of progress on trafficking in persons, because their economic benefits would have been on the line.
With that, thank you very much, Phil Robertson. Thanks for sharing with us.